My personal take on question 21 on page 39 of textbook 1 is that, in a way, it's almost self-explanatory that you do the multiplication first, which is really taking a fraction of a number. Because otherwise you're going to end up with parts of a whole number, which I don't really believe makes sense at this point, working through the book with the kids. Now, I could be wrong. I've not worked through every example in this book. I have an overall idea of what's going on in the book. I've not delved into it as deep as Mrs. Post has. So perhaps she would be the one that you might want to ask. However, since she's not available on this form at the moment, my input is going to be that you set up the questions and just try them yourself to see how they work out. So the first one really just says that 1 is the same as 1/2 of 2, and that's the example. And so if we put 2 here and we take 1/2 of 2, we're going to end up with 1, and that makes sense. It's pretty simple. The next one says 1/2 of 2 plus 3. So let's just write that out. 1/2 of 2 plus 3. So basically we're going to start with a 2 and then we're going to put a 3 there. Now, if we were to add the 2 to the 3 first, then we'd have to take half of that next, and that would be 2.5, and I don't think that really makes sense. So I think it's pretty obvious that what we need to do first is actually take half of 2, and then, which would be 1, and then add that to 3, and that's going to give us a whole number, which is 4. So I don't know, maybe there's some just some learning that needs to go on here while you play with the blocks yourself, or maybe while your kids are playing with them, to see that, well, it makes more sense to do this first. Now, that's not to say that you're never going to come up with decimal numbers or part numbers. You're going to, but I don't believe that he's made it that complicated in textbook 1 at the moment. So I think just, keep the common sense of part of it in mind. So that would be my take. Just play around with the blocks, let them see what happens when you do it both ways. Now, order of operations, obviously, is we do multiplication first in the order that it comes, and then addition. So it makes sense that we're going to, put our 2 here, put our 3 here, and we're going to do this operation first. We're going to take half of 2, which is 1, and then we're going to add them together. So perhaps this is a time to have a little lesson about order of operations. I wouldn't get into it too deep, just make it simple that, before we do addition, we do multiplication. You could add parentheses in here. I don't see the need for it. You could cup what you're going to do first. So you could say, this tells us to do this first, so we're going to cup what we're going to do first, and that really is like parentheses. I don't know if you can see them, but that would be like parentheses. So that would be my take on that particular question. Let's go to the next one. We've got 3 plus 1/2 of 4. So we're going to start off with your 3 here, and we're going to have a 4 here. This is what it tells us we're going to be using to do this. Now, we could start with the 3 and go this way, and we could add 1/2 to it, but that would give us 3.5, and then times 4. So 3.5 times 4, based on what you've been doing so far with the Cuisenaire rods, I don't think really makes sense. So I'm just kind of trying to get a feel for what Gattegno was thinking, and I'm thinking that he's assuming that possibly the people helping the kids out know the order of operations and are going to steer them in the right direction. I could be totally wrong on that. I don't know enough about Gattegno's theory to give you all the ins and outs of it like Mrs. Post does. I do know enough of it to know that it is it can be quite useful when working with the kids. However, I do think there has to be some intuitiveness on the parent or teacher's part as to where he's headed. My personal opinion would be here to say, okay, order of operations, we're gonna do multiplication first, and the reason we're doing multiplication first at this point in the game is that it makes sense to the problem. Instead of having 3.5 times 4, we're going to have half of 4, which is 2, and we're going to add the 3 we're going to take the 3 and add that to it, and we're going to end up with a whole number. And that's just my personal take on it, is that he's looking for things with whole numbers, so it makes sense that we're going to do order of operations, which is multiplication first. And perhaps that is how he's trying to teach it to the kids. I'm not really sure. Let's look at the next one. We have 1/2 of 4 plus 1/2 of 2. So we're going to start with a 4 and we're going to start with a 2. This tells us to half 4, which is going to give us 2, and this tells us to half 2, which is 1, and then to push them together. And that really does follow order of operations. So I think as long as you are able to tell your kids, you know, that multiplication comes first and then addition when we're doing these problems, and that's the convention based on everybody kind of coming up with the same answer. You could do it different ways and show them that you'll get a different answer each time. But I mean, if you just got little kids, I don't know if they're going to be, you know, wanting to, you know, take 4 and add half to it, and then, or half. Sorry, if you're doing it in the order you're going, you'd take half of 4 and then add half to that and then times that by 2. I don't necessarily know that your kids are at that stage. Perhaps they are, and you could show them how that would be different than taking half of 4 and half of 2. And I hope I'm not babbling too much. I hope this makes sense, what I'm trying to get across. But again, my take would be cup what you're going to do. Show them that you're going to take half of 4. You're going to take half of 2. Half of 4, and then half of 2. Half of 4 is 2, and then half of 1 or 2 is 1, and then you're going to push them together. The next question is 1 plus 1/2 of 4 plus 3. Again, you could do 1 plus 1/2, but then you're going to end up with 1.5 times 4. You know, plus 3. And again, I don't necessarily think that this is what Gattegno was trying to get across here. I think he was trying to get across, you know, fractions of a number, of a whole number, and half of 4 is 2. So we would start off with 1 here, 4 in the middle, and where's my 3? My 3 here. Okay, and he's really focusing on taking fractions of a number. So half of 4 is 2. And then these signs just tell us to push all that together, which is the same as 6. Okay, the next one is 1/2 of 2 plus 1 plus 1/2 of 4 plus 1. And again, my thought process here is that he's asking us to do fractions of a whole number, because that's what I believe he's kind of working on at this stage. Again, like I said, I don't know the book well enough, but that would be my take on it. So we have a 2, we have a 1, we have a 4, and we have a 1. Nope, sorry, a 1. So we're going to do this part first. 1/2 of 2 is 1. That 1, it doesn't tell us to do anything to it. Then 1/2 of 4 is 2, plus 1. Push those all together, and you end up with 5. Okay, again, you could do it if you were thinking left to right. You would do 1/2 of 2, which would be 1, plus 1, plus 1/2. And here's where I think the trouble is if you're thinking that you're going to go left to right, because now you're going to have 2.5 times 4, and I don't believe that's what he was thinking when he came up with these problems on page 39, question 21, book 1. I believe he was just thinking of halves of, or fractions of whole numbers. And in this particular case, it was halves of whole numbers. And I think that's what he was working on there. So I would just suggest play around with blocks and see what your take is on it. That's my take on it. I would introduce that multiplication is done before addition, and that we do multiplication and addition in the order that they appear. And it's really simple. Again, you just put your pieces out. There's your 2. You're going to do something to that 2. There's your 1. Put your 4 out. You're going to do something to that 4. And there's your other 1. Okay, this tells us to take half of 2. We don't really do anything to that 1 yet. This tells us to take half of 4. And now those plus signs just tell us to push them all together and find out what they are, which is 5. And I hope that helps.